the moment, who has been an active member of the Education Committee. He is in the Education Leadership and Management Department, and has written a number of articles, books, and has worked on a number of undergraduate and postgraduate programs, preparing education leaders and working in school communities. Pierre, a very warm welcome to you into our education conversation space. And let's open up with your welcome address.
Thank you very much, Professor Kat. Thank you for the opportunity, colleagues all over South Africa. It's really a great privilege to do the welcome this afternoon, especially in a very relevant topic, learning from COVID. And I think what we've seen the past 18 months has changed the landscape in many schools in South Africa, but worldwide as well. So all protocol are reserved. The conversation this afternoon with UJ Bridge and the Kagiso Trust is, as partners in education, I think it's a first, and I hope it's not the last one for the year, but I can foresee that there's a lot of relevant topics that will be discussed on this forum, and especially with the COVID-19, as I said, very relevant to all schools. And I think we've seen it, and all schools felt the impact and the disruption of COVID-19 in many aspects of learning and teaching and education in general as well. I'm very privileged. I've done some sort of research, especially in the rural schools, with the impact of COVID-19. One or two of my articles were published already, but speaking to many principals, they all indicated the enormous impact of COVID-19, which COVID had and still have on their respective schools. Emotionally, colleagues, teachers are drained. Academically, they are stretched to the limit. And what I've picked up from many principals, and I picked up a very a good word, all indicate that their learners, when they return to school, are not ready. So I've put in a word like our teachers in many cases, and then our learners are at the moment are academically unfit. After they came back, some are back in their numbers. Some schools are still using the scattered way of coming to school. So that is all a disruption which teachers were never used to. And I just did a workshop on the leadership in times of crisis, because I don't think our principals or SMT members, for that matter, were ever trained to handle crisis like this as well. For the first time, they had to really dig deep to come up with a sort of leadership that can lead a school during a time of crisis. Parents, for example, put a lot of pressure on schools. The education department are under a lot of pressure, and that flows over to our schools as well. Technology is another challenge for many schools, especially in our rural setup. I don't have to actually discuss that with you. Many of you know exactly how they are challenged, because some schools never had proper communication with their parents. So we can just add onto the problem that COVID-19 actually brought into our schools. Budget constraints. Fee-paying schools, principals indicated to me that in some cases, the fees dropped by 47%, and schools must, especially the fee-paying schools, they need to actually keep up their water, lights, etc., etc. So that is an enormous strain on schools if the school fees are not coming in. So we can continue focusing on the issues of disruption because of COVID-19, colleagues. I just want to wish you a great discussion and interaction this afternoon. Thank you for coming up with a very relevant topic. I can foresee that this is going to be a topic that will be discussed for years to come. Thank you to the teachers from the UJMA and Emily for joining us as well. Emily, thank you. I know you co-authored with Jonathan Jansen, which is a great privilege as well. And thank you for your talent coming into a book as well. I will listen a little. I must excuse myself earlier because I need to be at the school at 7:15. 3. But thank you, colleagues. May I wish you a very fruitful and an in-depth discussion this afternoon. We've got experts on the panel from Professor Kat, Emily, our teachers that are bringing the real thing out of our schools into this discussion this afternoon. So that is going to be a great one. May I wish you all the best. May you be blessed in your discussions, and always know that the learner comes first, and education is still my passion, but it is still a calling as well. And I hope for all of you as well. Thank you very much for that few words. All the best and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Professor du Plessis. A marvelous introduction indeed to our topic, COVID-19's impact on the future of education in South Africa. And I know that as you have that conversation around adding on the various challenges, I must say that we have some ingenious people on the ground in the form of teachers, principals, education teams who have really, under these very challenging circumstances, brought about the kind of innovation and the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that any crisis, brings to the fore. Somebody once says, never waste a good crisis. And I think that that's what the deliberation is going to be about today. So without further ado, people, our topic today really focuses on this conception of the idea that in handling the COVID crisis in education, there was a quick turnaround into the online learning space and how to get spaces digitally equipped. But as the reality stands in our country, and as you would all know quite vividly, we are not in a position where every learner is able to have digital access. And this has resulted in some of our children literally being left behind. But at the same time, there are pockets of hope in which we are able to look towards to see how the various spaces, particularly the low resource spaces, how they've coped with the situation and still endeavored to make teaching and learning happen. Around this, we are certainly into the discussion about how to find African solutions for African challenges. And again, the focus has to be on the vast majority of underprivileged schools and learners in our countries that cannot be left behind. So right now, our intention is to have a panel discussion, and we kick off the panel discussion with Emily, but Emily Orion, who has actually co-authored a wonderful book called Learning from COVID with Professor Jonathan Johnson. So we're very privileged to have her on board. But before we start introducing Emily and having her conversation, I'd like to introduce you to a Mentimeter exercise that will provide for us a word cloud. And I know that you guys in the audience have literally done a lot of this before in our previous sessions. So please don't feel shy. Get onto the link that is now on the chat space. And the question for you on the Mentimeter is one word you would use to describe learner experiences during COVID-19. And so if you start to interact with that one word interaction and provide us with some inputs, you're going to find that Emily's conversation is going to piggyback very beautifully from that. So just to introduce Emily Orion, our speaker, in terms of, she has written a wonderful book, which is called Learning Under Lockdown, Voices of South African Children, which can be, I think CNA publishes this book, and it can be purchased at a very reduced cost from CNA, but at the same time, I think a lot of the proceeds are also going towards supporting some of the lower quintile schools. So Emily is a writer and researcher in the field of politics, youth and development. She has been really active in civil society. In fact, if you look at most of her social network sites, you will find that you can find a lot of her, conversations really center around, social justice issues. She has graduated from Stellenbosch in international studies and South African politics. And she was the online editor for a student newspaper, Die Marti, in 2019, before writing opinion pieces for Netwerk 24. In 2020, she was recognized as Student of the Year So we've got somebody who has already made her mark, and she was recognized for making written contributions to the student newspaper and for her opinion pieces. Emily then spent the rest of 2020 co-editing Learning Under Lockdown with our distinguished Professor of Education, Jonathan Johnson. And she's writing her second book at the moment, entitled When We Were Wrong, Mistakes of South African Leaders, a book to really watch out for. So Emily, it gives me great privilege to welcome you to our platform and to welcome you into our space. Please go ahead with the conversation.
Thank you so much, Professor Kat. Hello to everyone who's joining us, wherever you are. I haven't met Professor Kat, by the way, in the flesh, but I can already tell that she's a powerhouse woman, and I thoroughly look forward to jumping on a plane and coming that side when all of this is over. I also love that today's conversation isn't just about problems, it's about solutions. We spent more than a year living in the madness that is COVID-19. So let's talk about solutions. It's very, very exciting. Before I start, I think it's just lovely to be here. I'm not going to be under any pretense about, I think I'm in very good company. I think we're joined by well-educated people who know their business about education. So I'm not going to pretend to have any new insights and know any more than you do necessarily about education, but certainly my background is politics and development. So today I would love to share with you from the horse's mouth, from young children in South Africa, directly about what their experience was like trying to do school in the middle of a pandemic. It's very normalized, but the more I think about it, it is really quite a situation. So let me just quickly introduce the project that I'm going to chat about, and then we can hear what everyone is saying on the Mentimeter. So about this project, it was about March 2020, the time when we were just hearing about a virus called COVID-19. And I was on a Zoom call with an education professor called Jonathan Johnson, who's quite easily one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And he suddenly just said, how do you feel about writing a book where we just get children to write their experience? When your niece or your nephew or your child comes home from school and you say, how was school today? And then you get the generic answer of good, fine. No, we really wanted them to sit down and we wanted to pull it out of them. We wanted them to share from their hearts, from their thoughts. How is it really? How is school really going? And so that's exactly what we did. Through Twitter and through Facebook, very simply, Prof. Janssen set out a brief and he asked young people ages 8 to 18, tell us, what was learning under lockdown like for you? Was it easy? Was it difficult? A bit of both? Did you have access to online learning? What role did your parents play? Are you homeschooled? Could you concentrate? Were you distracted? What tips do you have for other students? And the final result was that we got responses from over 600 children from every single province in the country, and they shared with us, which we then collected and put their experiences in this book, which is then themed because it's incredibly content heavy. And so this book is really just a collection of experiences like you've never heard them before. And that's what I'm about to share with you. So Prof. Kat introduced the Mentimeter, and I think it would be lovely if we could look at responses quickly of what everyone is predicting that we heard from young people in the country about how they would describe learning under lockdown. Is it possible to see that before I flight the video?
Vic, if you want to just put up the Mentimeter, please.
Thank you. There we go. So we've started getting some words. Challenging seems to be the biggest one, followed by stressful, confused, anxiety, scary, disappointing. Yes, I'm noticing in particular the word unequal, and that rings true, because certainly when Professor Janssen and myself started writing, that was our biggest predictor, that COVID didn't necessarily create a problem of inequality, it exacerbated an existing problem of inequality that we know all too well. Let me share my screen and share with you direct responses of young people that we received in the book. Just 1 second. Oh, golly. I'm gonna have to do it this way. Sorry. Right.
For me, grade 7 was the year I'd been looking forward to with great excitement. I looked forward to my last year of primary school, socialising with friends, the school play, and the tour. My hopes and dreams for my 2020 were fundamentally changed on the 16th of March.
Timothy Cook, Western Agricultural College, KZN. I had to learn to become friends with a laptop missing a C. Do you know how many times you need a C, especially with my surname, Cook?
Minzi Redere, Western Agricultural College, KZN. Learning online isn't enjoyable at all because my teachers aren't around. My teachers always find a way to make my subjects interesting.
Don't let distractions like the coronavirus get in the way of our precious education. Make the most of this lockdown. Improve in your timetables. Improve in all the subjects you do badly in, and you will be unstoppable. My name is Rhea Govender and I'm 11 years old and I attend FAM Heights Primary School, KZN. Thank you.
My name is Taprina Shimzanishita. I am 14 years old and I'm a student at St. Catherine's School, Jemison, Gauteng Province. I would like to go back to school because this is my future I'm looking at, and it is very important for me and other children to go back to school. I miss the interaction with other students and teachers. Learning under lockdown has made me appreciate the environment around me. It has made me appreciate what we take for granted every day. It has helped me to manage my time wisely. It has also given me the opportunity to ask for help from my siblings and parents. It has helped me to understand more about what the coronavirus is and its effects on people. Learning under lockdown has, most importantly, shown me the kindness of South Africans and the hope a nation united can bring to a little grade 8 student like myself and many others.
I learned 3 new sections in maths during this lockdown. I learned fractions, length, and multiplication of double digits. I struggled a bit with length. I was so frustrated when I could not understand it that I started to cry. On the weekend, when my mom was not working, she helped me to understand length. I now enjoy doing the exercises with length. I also learned 3 new sections in natural science. I learned about solids, liquids, and gases and how they change. I then learned about how important the water cycle is.
Teachers on screens are the new normal, and so is wearing PJs to class. Isn't that strange? It isn't even embarrassing anymore.
So there we have it. Directly from young people themselves. I'm not going to share my presentation and run through it very briefly. I'm actually looking forward to conversing and having questions. So I'm going to do this very quickly. So learning under lockdown, we expected to hear about inequality. And what we saw very clearly was extreme inequality in matters of internet connection, family support, basic needs, and the learning environment. I'm going to share with you some excerpts from a book very directly. Like I said, I just want to elevate these young voices and give them a platform to yourselves. So extreme inequality. These are 2 quotes from 2 very different circumstances. The first is from a boy called Jamie in KZN. And he says, for those of you reading this in the hopes of learning and discovering the challenges, difficulties, and tough times faced by students during this period, my time in lockdown was nothing more than exceptionally boring. I faced no struggle, no challenge. I'm a privileged boy. I live in an upper class white neighborhood where when the lockdown began, I did not worry for my future or of my parents. Compare that to what Bukosi has to say. He says disparate, pessimistic, tragic, grim, imprisoned and enraged. You see, I live in Khayelitsha, which many refer to as the biggest ghetto township in the Western Cape. It is also the 6th largest township in the country that currently holds more than 62% of the entire country's confirmed cases. This was COVID at the time. So it's sort of hard not to feel hopeless. There we see inequality right in front of us. When we talk about learning from home, we cannot talk about it without the internet. And I think the other speakers will speak about that. An anonymous girl said that she has a single mother who has spent almost 2,000 Rand in 2 months for her online studies. So she rather said, Mom, stop, and I will use my own knowledge and my textbook to study, while she watched her friends have Wi-Fi. Interestingly, on this young girl, actually very sadly, her mom passed away during the lockdown, and she unfortunately did not pass matric, but she is incredibly bright. And then we compare this to Mihle, who shares that on a normal day, WhatsApp would just be another app, and suddenly it's become a platform to be highly interactive and beneficial lessons, and to have lessons with his peers. Then we talk about extreme inequality in terms of family support. We had many funny stories with family support about parents phoning teachers to find out how much work that their children had done, and being absolutely shocked to hear they'd done very little. But I particularly enjoyed what Anna Buntu had to share in saying that their parents played both a positive and a negative role. And they were there for them every time they needed assistance, but mom often called out her name as if, you know, she was in trouble, only for her to find out that she was actually just asking for a cup of coffee to be made. Then in extreme inequality in basic needs, this is where we see how many homes had to choose between data or bread. So here we see how data was expensive. Many learners were expected to log in every day, while other learners just feel like they baked so many cakes during the horrible time to cope. Finally, extreme inequality in the learning environment. These were 2 experiences that I felt were quite notable. And also we had a teacher share her perspective, which I found incredibly interesting. The teacher at the bottom said that 2 months into the lockdown, she just sort of sat staring at the computer screen, which became her classroom. She missed the mayhem and the craziness and just wanting to hear that silly question. And then finally from Oren, who says that, you know, we are children. And I think this could be really the message I'd like to drive today. What Oren has to share is that we are children, whether I'm in grade 8 or grade 12, finding solutions to our government's shortcomings should not be our problem. This is beyond my control. But checking in on my friends is within my control. Doing the best I can, even with limited resources, is within my control. So at the end of this, when we are alive and healthy, we will be privileged. So I'm going to end with some recommendations that we took from the book. Like I said, I'm not going to pretend to be any better versed in education or education policy, but I can share what I've heard, and this is what I think. I think that whether learners had internet connection, bread, basic needs, a conducive learning environment, supportive parents or not, young people were overall optimistic about coping, and they often ended their essays in this book with words of encouragement for peers or even for themselves. I was so fascinated and completely did not expect to see how much capacity young people have for introspection, for reflection, and to solve their own problems. And when we launched, we had Duli Madonsela with us, and she shared after reading this book that never again do we make policy or education policy or decisions about the classroom without the learners who are in the classroom. And so children, we know now, have experienced lockdown completely differently, but they all struggled in some way, whether it was with bread or with mental health or with their family. And despite their struggle, the vast majority found something to be optimistic about. And I end with Caleb Williams's little motto to definitely think positive and test negative. So finally, here we have some recommendations, and I will do it through the example of Nsika Dantile. Ntika is a young boy, and on the left you will see how he spent his lockdown doing school. On the right you will see that through a mentor he was invited to give a talk with TEDx Stellenbosch. And though he was struggling, he's now been accepted to study a BCom at the University of the Western Cape. This really shows what's possible when we partner with young people. Ntika is someone who, at the mid-start of the lockdown, his granny died. His parents then separated. He experienced financial loss, and he was told by his parents that he was too young to understand what was happening. So at the age of 11, he was asked to be the man of the house and to look after his siblings. And his mom moved him to the Eastern Cape before he came back to the Western Cape and found his mentor. And that is ultimately a success story that I find is beautiful to share. So in conclusion, some recommendations. I feel that our biggest threat is not just COVID-19, but the fear of COVID-19 for our youth and the hopelessness that it breeds. This shows the importance of giving hope through personal connections. And then I have a question. Why is it that almost 52% of young people are unemployed, but there's this huge glaring need for mentors, tutors, and psychologists with young people? Another finding from the book, very clear, maths is a subject that was very difficult to do from home because there was no teacher nearby to answer questions. I strongly feel that we should capacitate and hire psychologists and social workers. The mental health outcomes that we saw was that few students spoke of actually reaching out for professional help. And many of them found such comfort in just reaching out to their friends if they couldn't find professional help. So we cannot equip young people with structured learning environments to navigate the distraction of working at home. We can provide them with reasons to learn, not just incentives, but by communicating to young people that their experience matters for decision-making and community work. A learner's ability to reflect, process, and communicate their experience will improve outcomes for them and for us as educators and policymakers. Everyone, I feel very, very strongly about young people and development, and I hope that I've shared at least one thing that can be useful in our journey and in our work. Thank you so much.
The voices that warm our heart and the voices that we really actually need to pay attention to. So Emily, I think you brought into our space some amazing conversation from the horse's mouth, as they say, because so much of conversation happens around what is best for children without ever asking them about their experiences and what they think is best for them. I see we have a very active chat room at the moment, really appreciating the book in so many ways, Emily. And I think that what you managed to do in terms of theming up some of the conversations from children is to bring about the realities, as one needs to have that at the forefront, but also to realize that, our children are our future, because with that, they also bring some of their own solutions, like the student who said to the mom, don't spend this money, I will actually put in the hard work. And then those are the kind of sensitivities that one needs to pay attention to. So a very big thank you to you for sharing your book. And I really can see from the chat room that many people are asking, so what was that title again? Which means that CNAs might be flooded with requests, for the book and for people to then hear. Just as a matter of interest, is that video that you played available online so that maybe we can share a link, or is it something that has to be purchased?
No, it doesn't have to be purchased at all. I've got a link for it online, which I can share.
Thank you so very much. If you could share the link on the chat, that will be useful because people are really interested in wanting to, access some of that information. And then I must say to Professor du Plessis, it looks like there is a homecoming crowd here for you, Prof. On the chat, there's actually people saying, is that Professor du Plessis? So obviously you've got a whole host of your, go-go girls, the rah-rah people that are here online, to have this conversation with us all as well, which again shows how much of a presence you have, and maybe you don't even realize it. Prof, what I have done is that there are a number of people that are interested in some of your published articles, and I have freely shared your email address without your permission. So you might hear from people who would want to connect with you on your research and so forth. And I hope you are okay with me doing that. But now to just sort of move on, we had a very interesting Mentimeter exercise that allowed for the audience to sort of bring into the space the kinds of things that they felt would be the experiences that children would have. And so we are going to display that Mentimeter exercise later on. So if there's anybody who feels the urgent need to want to still contribute to that link, you are very welcome to do so. But without further ado, our very own University of Johannesburg Metropolitan Academy, and both Mishka and Yandisa, wonderful teachers from this amazing School of Technology. I know that your colleagues and your principal and all kinds of people are going to be online to sort of allow you to make your debut. We are so very privileged to have both of you in the house today. But I first want to introduce Mishka Kotu, who is a teacher at the University of Johannesburg Metropolitan Academy. She is somebody who is one of our up-and-coming young teachers with a Bachelor of Education qualification in Accounting and English. She has done some amazing additional work in coding and robotics. And so I'm really intrigued by how some of your experiments with ICT implementation had actually happened during the COVID time, when teachers like you were people that everybody surrounded, in terms of being a reference, an expert, a guide, and ways in which young teachers these days allow us to, explore their experiences and their tech-savvy know-how to be able to support teaching and learning. So Misha is going to do a short presentation for us entitled Contributions to the Conversation, Teacher Experiences of Teaching Under the Constraints of COVID-19, African Challenges. And I'm hoping to hear a lot of your own experiences, Mishka, which I know we had a lot of conversation about earlier this year. Please, without further ado, please go ahead and wow us with all that has happened.
Thank you so much, Prof. Kat. And thank you to Kagiso Trust and UJA as well for allowing us this opportunity to kind of give our experience as well that we've had in this difficult time. I think we know that the ongoing COVID-19 global pandemic has had profound effects on the already flawed education system in South Africa. The implications of the lockdown have magnified the discrepancies between the lower and higher quintile schools, ascribed to inadequate infrastructure and resources predating the pandemic. We are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, building upon constant technological advancements in every sector, and the education sector is not excluded from this. I think teachers have been experimental with the adoption and integration of ICT in the classroom prior to COVID to aid in teaching and learning. But I think because of the importance of face-to-face learning, obviously, and habitual practice and methodology that we've been using for years and years, I think it's kind of taken a backseat as a primary source of educating, but instead we've been using it as an additional resource. So I think when lockdown happened for the first time in March last year, in order to prevent as much loss of time as possible with the syllabus, teachers were plunged into the deep end, and we had to quickly acclimatize to online teaching. In my personal experience, we resumed classes over WhatsApp and Google Classroom. Our school is a school of specialization in mathematics, science, and ICT. Our main vision is to provide a quality education and holistic development for learners, with a large focus on learners from previously disadvantaged communities. Excuse me. Our school is thus socioeconomically diverse. So we have students from many different backgrounds. We have students who come from the township who travel for hours, but then we also have our students who come from slightly better backgrounds who live just down the road. And these issues are highlighted or were highlighted during COVID. So I think this caused difficulties within the commencement of online teaching in our school in particular, as some of our learners had access at home to Wi-Fi and internet and laptops, whereas a large amount of our students did not have access at home. Because of this, we could not use any application that consumed too much of data, such as Microsoft Teams, Zoom, or YouTube. And this being said, further than that, I think a lot of teachers still went out of their way to send individual students data, and we really did the most that we can with the little that we had. My colleague Yandisa will elaborate more on our attempted usage of ICT during COVID, especially during lockdown. Our difficulties were indicative of the disadvantages caused by the substantial gap between the privileged and underprivileged. It is a symptom of a system whereby, despite resources being available to students at school, it is the inability to utilize these resources at home due to personal circumstances that impact learners in a much greater form. In rural and township schools, in particular, connectivity is even more inaccessible. In a recent study conducted by Amnesty International South Africa, only 10% of households in South Africa have an internet connection. In a time that depended on remote learning to salvage the school year, the vast majority of our schools and learners could not cope with this. The executive director of Amnesty International South Africa, Shanella Mohammed, said a child's experience of education in South Africa is still dependent on where they are born, how wealthy they are, and the color of their skin. The COVID-19 pandemic has made a broken, unequal system even worse, putting students from poorer communities at a huge disadvantage. Remote learning is not an option for the vast majority. Further than a lack of access, learners have been put through severe mental and psychological distress as well. I think we as adults have felt it as well. It takes a huge emotional strain. To examine children's psychological adjustment to the pandemic, researchers from JAMA Pediatrics in China ran a survey that showed higher rates of depression and anxiety among school children during the pandemic. I think this could be attributed to many things. It's the strain of the loss of a loved one. It is socially distancing themselves from friends and family. Having to do everything over WhatsApp, over Teams, over platforms that are so kind of unpersonal in a sense, where you don't have that interaction with the people that you care about and love on a daily basis. I think the self-isolation throughout lockdown, especially in stage 5, took huge emotional tolls on children. And it was escalated by familial problems, financial issues, and interpersonal difficulties as well. Psychological support that is often found at schools was removed due to lockdown as well. Teachers also found the strain of the pandemic to be detrimental to their mental health. The additional duties and responsibilities from the early morning screenings that we had to implement, setting up Microsoft Teams meetings every single morning. I think my colleagues and I can say that it's been a really tough time in terms of the additional duties that we have to do or that have been added to our already full schedules. It's been early mornings, it's been constantly running up and down to fit in to this new world that we are now living in and that we now have to adjust to. We have constant technological strains and constraints, unlearning antiquated methodologies and quickly learning new methodologies with little to no additional training. We've had a lot of discourse in the past few months about COVID protocols being the new normal. It's so important that we adapt to these times and find feasible and inclusive solutions to ease the struggles that we've been facing during the pandemic, as teachers as well as the learners. And I think this is largely surrounding ICT as well, but as well as integrating ICT into our classrooms, I think we also need to look at how we can financially kind of lessen the gap between the privileged and the underprivileged that we have in our country. And I think we can start by looking at government resources and the allocation of government resources. So if you look at the data usage in our country, we don't have many spaces where people can go and freely use data. If you look at Australia, in Perth, they have what we call a blanket internet server that in large parts of the CBD, there's free Wi-Fi that is there for the public to use on a larger scale. So it's a blanket internet that covers the entire CBD. And I think we could look at certain solutions in South Africa to implement something like this for the underprivileged or for communities that don't have access to the internet to have a bit more accessibility in that regard. I also think that it's important for us to have a follow-up. So yes, the government has been implementing a lot of technology in our schools. So we've set up smart boards, we've set up learner devices for students, but we need that technology to be accessible to students at home as well as at school or whichever place that they are learning at. I think it's also important for data providers and external companies to input, and we really need to use and learn from the term Ubuntu, where as a country, we need to come together and look at solutions and what everyone can bring to the table. I think this would help a lot in terms of access and lessening that gap between the rich and the poor. I think further than that, training is such an important thing. I think we have a lot of teachers that are struggling with the adjustment to ICT integration in our classrooms because of a lack of training. So it is either a non-comprehensive training that we would receive, or it is a little bit too advanced. There isn't a middle ground which looks at what the teacher's struggles are and aims specifically to help each individual teacher acclimatize to the ICT that we have to integrate into our classrooms as well. We need constant ICT support and development in our schools. ICT is something that is changing every day from a day-to-day basis. We always have new apps and we have new platforms to share information, and it's an incredible thing. But I think if people know properly how to use the different platforms in their spaces, not only within the education sector, but in general, I think it could be a really beneficial thing to have and to grow as a country despite our challenges. But it has been an interesting year, and I am so fascinated to hear the feedback that Emily has given us, because I think a lot of students have it's taken a toll on their mental health, and it's taken a toll on students emotionally as well as teachers. And it's lovely to know that there is still hope. I think it's what gets us going from day to day, especially as teachers. It's why we do it. It's so that we can help our students to the best of our abilities. And that means constantly evolving and constantly learning so that we can be the best that we can be. But my colleague Yandisa will be further taking you through what we actually did this year and last year. I think, but I think it's been interesting, and thank you so much for having me. I look forward to continuing.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mishka, for your amazing conversation. And I think you hit the nail on the head, this idea of adaptive expertise, the idea of acclimatizing to changes that you have no control over, the idea that change is going to be an ever constant, and how to, approach a change mindset. I see Josine on the Fest from Fly Cows of Josie is in our audience today. And Josine has put onto the chat, really agreeing with you on so many levels, but also saying, how do we change mindsets? And how do we support people through that change process as we transition on online? I think Emily had one aspect that she spoke of, which was about online learning not being the same as the face-to-face social encounter, as one of the learners alluded to, and what would be the kind of online way of still keeping people connected, through a very human need of wanting to be together. And so, Mishka, I think that your experiences is probably echoed by a huge many teachers out there, and I think what was of value from your conversation really centered around what are the implications for teaching and learning when we get put into these situations that we are not able to control. I do think that UJMA has been one of those spaces that has really done some innovative work in that space. And it's because you have committed teachers. I still remember Yandisa's wonderful comment during our circle that day when she said, how will I make offline learning of the same quality and of the same impact as I would do for any online student? And so suffice to say that there are very many ways in which this is being thought about at the moment. So what I would like to do, next is to basically introduce another multiple choice Mentimeter exercise, which you'll now find on your chat, people. And in that space, we are asking an imperative question around what are the major factors, and Mishka has alluded to some, that teachers in South Africa, have experienced or are experiencing during COVID-19. And we've got 4 options on that, Mentimeter. And I deliberately didn't put the choice of all of the above, because I really wanted to see what are the main things or the majority of things of people feeling in terms of what teachers, what kind of factors impact teachers. And I put curriculum coverage as the first option, online teaching and the digital divide as the second option, remote learning as the third option, and learner well-being as the fourth option. Very interesting to see from that exercise, and piggybacking on Mishka's conversation, what do people feel would be, some of the major factors that are impacting teachers? I know it's all of the above, but I really wanted to see which of these would be, taking the prize in terms of where teachers stand. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce another one of us, University of Johannesburg Metropolitan Academy's Yandisa. I hope I pronounce your surname right, Yandisa. I should have asked you this question before the session. Shani? Fantastic. And Yandisa is going to be with us as a teacher who is in the economics sort of field. She does quite a bit around economics and education. She's very interested in people and is a very learner-centered teacher. And I'm sure on the Mentimeter, her choice will be learner well-being without a doubt. So definitely her biography already speaks to that kind of person. So Yandisa is going to have some conversation with us about this concept that has been a worldwide conversation. The more wealthier countries, the Finlands of this world, who have got all the resources and all of the wealth to be able to provide for children in ways that we can possibly only dream about, don't offer us too much they do offer some things by way of thinking about how we could do things differently. But on very many occasions, we are faced with the issue that Africa has its own challenges. It is home to conceptions that need our own understanding of what happens contextually here in our country, and to serve everybody as a space of equal education for all. And so Yandisa is going to bring into the conversation for us African solution to African challenges, particularly as a teacher during this time of COVID-19. Yandisa, over to you. You want to unmute, and Yandisa, we can't hear you. Maybe you want to unmute.
Go. Am I audible? Am I here?
Absolutely, we can hear you loud and clear.
Lovely. All right, thank you so much. And I want to echo what Ms. Kotu had said. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for having us here. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I will be sharing if people just want to follow along. The way that I have presented the conversation that I was asked to have is, I am a storyteller. As an economics educator, this is how I work. I tell a story. Sadly, the story that I'm going to tell now is based on the experiences that we have all been having worldwide, countrywide, and within the school that I work in. So I have been asked to speak on 3 aspects of what has been happening within the teaching and the education space, right? I will first speak on adjusting to make learning happen. Next, we'll talk about some of the solutions that myself and my colleagues had come up with to try and mitigate the limitations on learning that were caused or still are being caused by COVID. And then lastly, I will talk about the larger aspects of how the education of department and those that are responsible for the learning of learners, as well as the teaching done by teachers, and what they have done to enable us to continue in what we are meant to do. So I will be sharing my screen just in a moment. I hope everyone will be able to see. And here we are. All right. So after the initial shock of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'll just start off with some honesty. I think for most teachers in the teaching field, this is how we had felt. When the pandemic hit, when COVID hit, it came out of nowhere, and these were our feelings right off the bat. But the positive is this, right? I think after a process of adjustment, we all feel that we are in a space where we are slightly calmer. We know to the best of our abilities what we are doing and where we are trying to go. We understand everybody's fears, everybody's anxieties, and we're in a space where more of us are there for one another in so many different ways. All right, but our story begins with the shock of COVID-19, right? And the level 5 lockdown that the country underwent. It became clear that it would become necessary to return to learning and teaching spaces once again. We at UJ Metropolitan Academy, along with hundreds of learners and educators countrywide, had to find new ways to adapt to what was essentially teaching as we know it, but in an environment that looked nothing like what we were used to. I think the major driving force behind our need to find new ways to adjust to make learning happen, in all honesty, was simply the decision that the school year would continue. Right. With this being the case, we had to find ways to help our learners continue to achieve academically to the best of their abilities, while still trying to keep their spirits up and still trying to keep their anxieties down. Additionally, we can't forget the other side of the coin. Teachers were feeling just as anxious, just as nervous as the learners to return to this learning space that we have become so accustomed to, but with all of these new laws, these new regulations, we have mask wearing, social distancing, and so on. Right, COVID-19 in many ways pushed teachers to make decisions they may have put off for another time. For example, many older and well-experienced teachers took the decision to retire either earlier than they had planned to or than they had expected to. Right. Learners and parents had to weigh up the pros and cons of learners returning to school physically or attempting to learn online from home. And listen, this might be a statistic that I am 100% making up, but I am also 100% sure that it is true. But I can attest that 80% of learning and teaching happens through contact. It has been mentioned by my colleague Mishka, it has been mentioned by Emily that learners and teachers, we need that. We need that as much as we have attempted to create, on the videos, we attempted to create that, but that contact that we have between learners and educators, it adds so much to both learning and teaching that without it, when these learners returned back to school, we saw that that gap was there, right? Which is funny because, I mean, if you ask most teachers, they will tell you that they teach at their best when there are no learners. Right. I do believe that a major contributing factor that allowed us at UJMA to be able to continue as best as possible and still achieve quite successful results was the establishment of a routine, right, for both teachers and students. Mishka did mention about how daily we had our screenings. We knew this is the schedule for screening, this is the teacher that's on screening. Learners walked into the gate and they understood that this is where I am allowed to be, this is where I'm not allowed to be, this is, and when you start establishing that routine, learners want that. It's very interesting to think about and very interesting to see, because learners are always speaking about how they want their freedom, but they had that so-called freedom for a long time over the lockdown. But the moment they came back to school, it's almost like they craved that sort of routine. So us at UJMA coming up with this routine, right, allowed for both us as teachers to understand what is expected of us, right? Learners, when they weren't at school, they understood what they were supposed to be doing. We as teachers, we knew what the learners in front of us, what they needed, but also those that were not in front of us. We understood what their needs were on a daily basis. Right, with the singular goal of helping our learners not only ease their stress and anxiety, but also to achieve well academically, educators did try finding different and creative ways of both connecting with as well as teaching our learners. Right, some of these solutions were brilliant to say the least. Right. But what we need to keep in mind is there is a vast difference when it comes to the different subjects that are taught. So the manner in which a teacher or an educator would try to convey information to learners would differ vastly based on the subjects that they teach. So it now, especially before schools had opened, so there was that extended period of schools being closed, it was up to us, right, as educators to think and to think creatively. The learners are not here now. They're not in front of us. Okay, I teach science. I teach economics. What is the best way? What is the best? How can I connect with them in a way that is different, but still trying to convey the information as best as possible? Right, so I will list a few examples that Prof. Kat, we had mentioned in the meeting that we had last time. We have, for example, an accounting teacher, right? In particular, I'm talking about Ms. Kotu, who realized that the use of Google Classrooms allowed for her to have interactive sessions with learners. And these learners were not only able to solve problems along with her in real time, but they were also able to ask and answer questions as they went along. We have an Afrikaans educator who realized that teaching language, right, the language portion of her subject to learners who were not in front of her would be exceptionally challenging. And so what she did is she turned to the literature. She turned to the literature by doing the following. This teacher would record herself reading a novel and encourage learners to read along with her. She would then explain and translate what she has read very similarly to how she would have done it within the classroom, right? And then she would also send these recordings to learners via the WhatsApp so that they had that with them and they had the ability to look back on those recordings, to listen at any given time. And the feedback that this teacher received from these learners, it was funny because the way that she had put it, she mentioned how learners felt like they had her in their room with them, teaching them, which sounds funny, but it's that little bit of connection that they were craving, that little bit of the teacher is closer to me than without having those voice notes. Right, we also have an English teacher who, along with creating workbooks for her younger learners, also created a YouTube channel that explained the content of the worksheets. It also then explained what was required of the learners when they completed that work. They were then also able to mark the work, right, as they went along. So that is a fully and complete assessment that has been done, right? As an economics educator, I personally would take the equivalent of 1 period a day. I would have my textbook out, right? I would tell learners to follow along in their textbook. So I would tell them what page they need to be on so they can follow along with me. I would send them the notes that I was using because I have summaries, etc. And then what I would do is I would explain. We'd read together, and then I would further explain concepts, ideas, and models over a WhatsApp voice note, right? I would then allow for questions to happen and then address these questions as they came up. And we would do this. We would do this every day for at least 40 minutes because this is the equivalent of a single period. So what we started to realize and what has been mentioned is because of the, how can we put it, just the availability of WhatsApp, we started to realize that, listen, WhatsApp really became one of the primary tools that teachers use to communicate with learners. Because of the variety of features, it allowed for teachers to send handwritten notes, even if it's a picture of a handwritten note, to send PowerPoint presentation, voice notes, and sometimes it even allowed for learners to do assessments via WhatsApp. I had a discussion with one of my colleagues, and this is a language teacher, and she had mentioned to me how learners had been enabled to record a speech that they had prepared and send it to her via WhatsApp, right? For this, and I thought this was so incredibly innovative and so incredibly helpful, because what this did is it further helped in reducing the anxiety, right, that many learners feel and many learners face when they are forced to speak in front of a crowd of people when it is not their forte to do so. And look, I feel a lot of these innovations and a lot of these additional options that we are giving learners may not have been available to them prior to us being pushed by COVID to think slightly more creatively. Right, but as it has been mentioned by my colleagues and by most of us that are in this conversation, there are certain things that we cannot ignore. As my colleague has mentioned, that our school does provide for learners that are on two separate ends of the spectrum, right? We have our much more affluent learners in an environment that houses learners that are on, like I said, the absolute other end of the spectrum. So given the availability and the connectivity of the internet that varies from absolute and uninterrupted to non-existent for learners at our school, due to the factors mentioned by my colleague, all of this was done. So all of the videos that were recorded, the Google Classrooming, the WhatsApping, the voice note, it was done by teachers, but with the idea and with the knowledge that to a large extent, most, if not all of the work was going to have to be repeated in the classroom again. And you know what, as much as this feels like it's a duplication of efforts, it had to be done. It had to be done because, as Prof. Kat had mentioned, we are unable to simply assume, simply assume that everybody had access to these platforms. And what we were trying to do is to ensure that those learners who did not have access to these platforms, and to a large extent were perhaps too shy or too embarrassed to make known that they didn't, were not made to feel less than because of the lack of access. This is something that they have no control over. right? I feel that this indicates very much that although individuals, right, individual teachers, individual schools can to a large extent be creative in our own spaces and in our own subjects and in our own teaching, when we attempt to close the gap in teaching, there are still factors outside of the control of our control, as well as the control of the learners, that restrict how effectively we can react and be prepared for unprecedented events such as the current pandemic. Right? The Department of Education, I feel, has, or not I feel, it is, they have a pivotal role to play in empowering and allowing teachers, schools, and learners to continue to play their part regardless of interruptions in teaching and learning. I feel this is especially necessary in rural communities and rural schools. To briefly touch on, because I had been asked to discuss and touch on some of the efforts in the education sector that have been put into place to soften the impact, right, of COVID-19 on learners and on teaching. I can only speak from my own experience, and I can only speak from what I have personally seen and what I have personally been a part of. So the Gauteng Department of Education has, since 2015, launched what is referred to as the Classrooms of the Future project. What this project has done, or what it entails, is providing smart boards, laptop devices to teachers, as well as learner devices in the form of tablets to learners. These devices are then, so these schools that have received such devices and such support are then referred to as full ICT schools. Right, this is done in an effort to allow learners access and exposure to technology in learning before they reach a tertiary level of education, where use of such technology would be much more commonplace. Right, if you have a look at the pictures that are in my presentation, this is the use of the smart boards. We have one of our own educators using Zoom lessons, because this is one of the strategies that had been used by UJMA, where due to social distancing, we were unable to have our full classes in one class. So we would have to split them. One class would be in one venue and the other in a separate venue. But as the teacher taught, they would teach via a Zoom lesson. So the one half of the learners received the teacher physically there teaching, whereas the other half would then be observing via Zoom. And the smart boards and the ICT equipment that were put into place, they were incredibly helpful to us in this sense. Right, the initial focus of this program, our Classrooms of the Future, was on no-fee paying township secondary schools. It later started to include fee-paying township schools, as well as other non-township public schools, including our school, UJ Metropolitan Academy. Now, in my opinion, this is indeed an excellent initiative. And according to reports and according to what has been put out there on the news, it has shown positive results, as seen in the improvement in maths and science marks in schools that are participating. But to me, this then begs the question of whether Gauteng is where the need is most pertinent. Do other provincial education MECs plan to follow suit? Are they even capable of doing so, given the state of rural schools in provinces with much lower urbanization levels than Gauteng?
These are such amazing questions that you actually ask, Yandisa. You know, I mean, I think you are just hitting the nail on the head on just so many levels, you know, and I must tell you that we have, you know, some very, very amazing commentary online, you know, that already speaks to how people are impressed with your presentations. So Professor Kabelo Chiwane from the University of Limpopo writes, I'm wowed by Yandisa's presentations. We should clap hands to all agentic teachers who do their best to solve problems for Africa. And there's just so many more, but I'm afraid that time is against us, and I'm going to have to ask that we start to engage with our audience again. And on that note, I'd just like to acknowledge the trustees of Kagiso Trust who took time out from their really very busy schedules to join us. Mankone Ntsaba, who's the chairperson of the board, and Andrew Madalak. We really, I'm sorry that I'm welcoming you so late into the program, but really very happy that you made the time to enjoy us and to be, continued to be, wowed by some of the presentations made by the teacher. And of course, Emily, who, has written this book around some pertinent conversations that children have had. So I don't know if Mitesh or Bhavik, you want to put on the Mentimeter exercise on what people thought teachers, what is the major factor impacting teachers? We asked as a multiple choice exercise. I don't know if you want to just maybe put that up. My God, it's really impressive that curriculum coverage is the one that came out really tops. Because honestly, it doesn't surprise me, guys. That's one of the places that everywhere that I go and any person involved with education that you actually speak to talk about how learners are being left behind. And there was this wonderful conversation that Teresa Snyder, who's from New York, actually brought up in one of the Diane Ravage blogs that actually spoke about the question around what we conceptualize as curriculum and learning. And does COVID not then provide our children with learning experiences that we need to, consider as part of the conversation around curriculum that we need to have. I know there was a lot of concern about trimming the curriculum, a lot of teachers feeling I must, this famous word of cover the syllabus or cover everything. And so the conversation has shifted slightly, and I think I would like for us as an audience to start thinking our position on this in terms of covering things where in a VUCA world today, it's really and truly much more about using authentic experiences in which to create conditions for learning. And what would be the ways we could actually include, I'm running a brand new ADE program, and this is again, maybe advertising a bit for the faculty at the University of Johannesburg. It's an advanced diploma in education leadership and management. And I must tell you that the module that I'm teaching is called Leading Teaching and Learning for School Principals. And in that particular module, I really center around this conception of curriculum and curriculum, that's of relevance from life itself. And what would be the ways in which we could actually, capitalize on some of that. So it's very interesting for me that our curriculum coverage space, has got significant input, which means then that our shift in thinking around that needs a lot of input. Last or sharing a tie is the remote learning and the learner well-being. And yet so much of Maslow's hierarchy of needs speaks to learner well-being as being one of the primary areas that we need to focus on in terms of enabling. So before you have cognition taken care of, one has to take care of basic needs. The whole Maslow before Bloom idea. So some lovely answers coming through. And so thank you guys for actually being so engaging, with providing us with your inputs here. It brings in some interesting elements into the conversation. But now we have one last exercise before we hit the Q&A space. And in this, Mentimeter exercise, we're hoping to harness some more opinions from you, our audience, and we might use it as part of our, what have we learned from the session, section. So here we would like you to respond in an open-ended way in one sentence or whatever to the prompt. After listening to the panel members, I believe South Africa, education in South Africa needs to. So if you can just maybe engage with that Mentimeter in the meanwhile, we can get some of our collective learnings from what our panelists have shared with us. But without further ado, I'm going to now address some of the questions that were posed on our chat spaces to our panel members, and let's see how many of these questions we can actually answer in the next couple of minutes that we have available. So we have a question from or a Facebook comment that one of the assumptions made during lockdown was the assumption that connectivity will easily replace the classroom, forgetting that public schooling is significantly driven by classroom interaction and conversation. So I want to address that question. It's open, so I want to address it to Emily. Just to say, Emily, from your experiences, from the voices of the children, was the online learning experience all of that, or were there things that seemingly were problems? I know you had one case where you suggested something about children not enjoying online learning, but maybe you want to just maybe share a little bit more on that point.
So what's fascinating actually is, we say that no classroom can, no amount of digital classroom can replace the real classroom. But then we also consider the future and what's going to happen in the future. We've currently got the youngest and fastest population is in the African continent, and how are we going to educate everyone? Is it going to be through building 4 walls as a school, or are we going to expand our idea of learning and what is contact? Of course, we need contact learning, but how do we define what is contact? Maybe you see contact as being tactile, but I see contact as connecting through the same Wi-Fi portal. So to answer your question, Prof. Kat, is what we found distinctly was that a lot of young people miss those social cues of putting on their uniform in the morning, of the drive to school, of waking up in the darkness, of the class clown. Even they miss the cues of the school bell, the lunch break. And so I think that has been the challenge. When I read their stories, it was that the school experience that they crave for in terms of content, of contact. But, in terms of learning, and I see a lot of the responses say, curriculum coverage, it seems to me like young people are incredibly adaptable to trying and connecting online. There were 3 layers of it. We found there was a group of learners who could do it on Google Classroom, a group of learners who were doing it through WhatsApp, and then a group of learners who were kind of using the radio maybe. So in summary, to answer your question, I hope I've answered it.
No, you absolutely have. And I really like the idea of the social cues, which people don't actually, the routine that kids actually need that might have been interrupted. And of course, everything was happening in the home environment, and the home and now suddenly piggyback as the classroom, as the office space, as everybody getting into each other's faces and all of the rest. So yes, I agree with you, but I also think over a period of time, a lot of consideration has had to happen around how do we maybe invest in a blended situation where part of this experience could be the face-to-face interaction, but then how do we keep up with some of the remote learning experiences that could be useful, and could support learning, because certainly it does make learning cheaper, in so many ways. And for a country like ours, where financial constraints are often an issue, what would be the ways we can provide quality learning for everybody, but something that could be workable, should there be access across the board? And I think you are absolutely right. We do need to think into the future and not just keep thinking about how do we get back to things the way they were. So no, thank you so much for that response. I think it sort of covers maybe the sentiments of most people on there. I have another question about online learning. And this is about the digital divide from Dr. Sundani, who asked, what could be instant solutions by government institutions to mitigate the digital divide? And I think I want to hand this question over to Yandisa, because I think, Yandisa, you had alluded towards the end of your presentation. Are we prepared? Is Gauteng the only province that seemingly seems to have resources, so maybe if you want to talk about what kind of governmental solutions should this country be thinking about, and that maybe can respond to Dr. Sundani's question.
So thank you very much for this question. I have always felt very strongly and continue to feel very strongly that there are no instantaneous solutions, and there is no one solution that can be put into place that will fix all of the problems. Yes, for me, it's always been, it's a concern, and it's still a concern to this day, that the provision of education in this country is still so ununiform. It is not equal. So at what point we need to start from the grassroots to first ensure that the provision of education is equal, infrastructure is the same for all schools in all of the provinces. We need to ensure that, because as I had mentioned, if I'm talking and I'm comparing the smart boards projects, and where are you going to put a smart board when children are learning outside under a tree, when there is no electricity in the school? So I feel that as much as slowly in the Gauteng province, yes, we are starting to become more aware of the current problems that we are facing. We need to start from the grassroots and ensure that countrywide we have an equal and a uniform quality of education that's been given to learners. Then we can take it to a scenario of, okay, what do we do if we face another pandemic? And what can everybody do at the same time if we face another pandemic? Because now it really was a situation of everybody has to think on their feet. Everybody has to think on their feet, and whatever your solution is, okay, but I can't put that into place. And that was never fair. That was never fair, and that was never equal.
So Yandisa, maybe the question for us, because you are speaking of a nirvana or a utopia, as they call it, where we wish that for all of our children, but the reality in our country is not going to change overnight or anytime soon. So I know there is a conjecture, and my students are grappling with it at the moment, around education in your pocket. In other words, how do we use cell phone technology as one of the ways in which we can enable access? And what would that look like, countrywide for our children, which then doesn't require all the infrastructure that you're talking about in terms of physical infrastructure, but that enables, children to be able to access if smartphones and connectivity, is an issue. The other thing also is that a lot of people have commented on what would be offline access. In other words, you don't need internet access for these resources. And what would be the places for that, and who would be involved with producing those that might be aware. I have a student of mine in the form of Leon Roots. He's doing his master's at the moment, and he's written a wonderful article for his assignment that deals with future-proofing education, on how private schools that have all the bells and whistles can create some of these offline materials. And so I just wanted to mention that, because there are places that are thinking about this in a much broader way than let's make everything online. Yandisa, another question from you that was specifically addressed to you was talking about, this is from Sven Littenberg, and he asks, reflecting on experiences of teaching through a pandemic, in what ways do you think your experiences and that of your colleagues could impact pre-service teacher training? So the kind of teacher training that happens at universities. What would be your advice, on how we could use the pandemic experience to improve our teacher preparation?
So I personally had very little that kind of teacher preparation time, because I did a PGCE, which was only 1 year. So I think I had maybe 2 experiences within different schools. But even given that, I do feel that student teachers can be encouraged to think just a little bit more innovatively. And also, if anything, if I'm being honest, to prepare well ahead of time. Because even as a teacher who is currently in education, and I myself struggled with, oh, how do I cover the content and allow these learners to work from home when I haven't given them that content to work with already? So I do think that student teachers can definitely be taught to be well prepared, right, or in advance, but also how they would use, because I mean, the student teachers that are coming in, these people are young, they have ideas. Those ideas need to be asked. We need to ask them, how do they think we can implement? What are the creative new ways of teaching that can be used within the classroom? We need to use the skills and the knowledge and the experience that they have had, because the following student teachers are going to be people that they themselves were in school during a pandemic. And what did they think could have been used and could have been a good tool in a scenario like this?
No, absolutely, Andisa. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. And a very last question that I can direct to Mishka is to talk through a question that was sent in by Puleng, who asks, there's so much of emphasis that we're having right now on this business of online teaching and learning, but formative assessment seemingly is something that has been quite, neglected, particularly in the online environment. I don't know, Mishka, if you have any response to Puleng on this, on what would be the kind of formative assessments that could be done, especially during lockdown periods. What would be the ways one would do that?
I think it's something that's quite important, especially in a time like last year where we saw that we needed to finish the curriculum, but finishing the curriculum also includes our assessments as well. So I do think that it's important to look into platforms that do allow for us to have our formative as well as our summative assessments. And I do know that in a lot of schools, what happened was they would have a Microsoft Teams set up or Zoom set up while the student was writing. The student needed to prove, and I think a lot of universities did this as well. So the student needed to move the camera around to make sure that there weren't any additional resources or anything of the sort that could assist them while they were busy. This is obviously a bit difficult because there will always be that aspect of a student who wants to cheat or who wants to take advantage of the online assessment. But there are many platforms such as Google Forms, you can, as well as Google Classroom. So I know there's a whole assessment tool on Google Classrooms, which was really helpful. And I used it as a summative assessment last year when we were using Classrooms, where students can submit their work. And there's two options when it comes to Google Classroom. So the first option is whereby you can create a memo, and so the submitted answers can automatically be marked by the system. Or alternatively, you could just manage what the students have submitted and mark it yourself. But it's a really nice tool that I think we could also use in general life as well and integrate into our general practices, because students can submit online and you can see exactly who submitted, when they've submitted. So I do think that aside from COVID, I do think that it's a helpful tool that we can use. And I do think as time goes on, we are having more and more platforms introducing solutions to these issues, because it is an issue that we are facing on a daily basis now within education. And so as they become more readily
I agree
available,
with you 100%. Assessment was one of those hotspot areas, even for universities, in terms of how to deal with some of the issues that one would have with online assessments. But I think it's a continuing conversation with all the tools and the bells and whistles that are available. But also, I like the idea of taking a picture with the WhatsApp mechanism and submitting that as something in a space where things may not be as easily available. So, guys, I think we could go on forever with this conversation. It's just been such a lovely afternoon, being with all of you and the wonderful interaction. that our audience has created. I don't know if we can put up the last Mentimeter piece just to show, what kind of learnings. So the questions around education needs to adapt to the new ways of doing things, especially technology. It needs to be integrated. It needs to seriously address issues of inequality in the education systems. There needs to be critical engagement with normal versus the expectations of the education department, serious transformation. And we're definitely going to post a lot of these commentary that people have put on here, on our online platforms of Kagiso Trust, education, UJ education platforms, as well as the Bridge platforms. So all of this is going to be beautifully available. And I think what this has brought, to the fore, that we do need serious transformation. I'm just going to use somebody's contribution here, that, serious transformation, and not tomorrow, but actually now. And I suspect that we are going to be in this for a long time to come. And maybe this is where we are in the next little forever. So how do we then create the kind of on-the-feet transformation? How do we create spaces in which people can experiment and innovate and do things that allow us to create pedagogies and to create assessments and all kinds of things that could be much more authentic and can lead us to a world in which the VUCA arrangement is starting to become more prominent. And we hope that in the future also, we will have the next generation of learners who will contribute some amazing things to the world, just because we've given them an education platform that allows them to have the potential that we know our learners have, and to show the world that there are many more Elon Musks and many more other people, Siyabulela Tusa, who very many people don't know has a planet named after him, a very young 27-year-old who has done some amazing work in science. So, these are the role models of the future, and their stories are interesting indeed, but they also came through an education system that was not a good fit. And this is our opportunity to provide the kind of education that brings us more of those people in the world. So with that, I would like to introduce our person in the form of Sizakele Mpatso from Kagiso Trust to do our vote of thanks. Colleague, I'm really sorry that we have gone a little bit over time, but I wonder if you could just maybe do the vote of thanks for us. And then we can call it a day and allow everybody to continue the conversation online. Sizakele, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. I would like to start by thanking our trustees and the EXCO who took time to attend this session. And can I just mention, because there are a few, I would like to thank our chair, Manko Ninsaba. I would like also to thank the other trustees, Andrew Marlak, Denzo, and including our CEO, Manko Dimhitse, and our COO, Temba Mola. And above all, I would like to extend our gratitude to all the attendees who put aside time to be part of this conversation. What I can say maybe in closing is that all the inputs that are shared and which will still continue to be shared on our social platforms, we invite people to continue engaging on this topic. We are an organization that at the heart of us, we want to make sure that we provide access to quality education, especially for public schools and the rural areas children who are in the rural communities. And we do this by developing models which are responsive to the settings that we find a majority of our peoples residing in. And with these models that we provide, it is confirmed from this discussion here, the conversation, even from what the speakers have shared, that for you to be successful at the center of delivering a quality education, you need to have quality teachers. and quality teachers will come in a form of being supported. And also we need teachers who go beyond the textbook, but who will become innovative to be able to provide solutions and provide quality learning and also teaching for our learners in the new normal that we find ourselves in, where we see the huge digital divide that has been brought in by the pandemic, which is still a huge gap. Prof, you have said that we cannot bring the solutions overnight, but we believe that from these deliberations, as the KT education team specifically, we take these learnings, we take the research that is ongoing to further inform our development of our offerings, to further reimagine our education model so that it is responsive in the 21st century, and ensuring that we align it to the fourth industrial revolution, which we cannot run away from. It doesn't matter whether you are in a city or rural area. We are greatly impacted and we are greatly affected. And I hope that we will also continue to get insights on how can we make sure that teaching and learning still continues under the difficult circumstances and environment that our schools find themselves in. We are currently, it's confirmed, we are in the third wave. And looking at where we are in terms of the resources and response, especially even from the department or other providers like ourselves, we haven't moved great strides, and yet we are now within the third wave. So we need to think on our toes and provide solutions that will make sure that we don't go back to 2020, where we were all frustrated and not knowing what to do. So Prof and the presenters, I would like to thank you for making time and preparing such informative and fruitful presentation that are not only talking to theory, but they are talking about real-time people, about real-time situation, people that from your presentation, I could see each and every one of those participants, either at the research or even your students, Yandisa, in the classroom. I could visualize your classroom and also visualize your teachers as they sit together and plan. So these are the learnings, these are the best practices that would like to embed in our offerings, also embed in the partnerships that we have, especially with government, because we do all this to make sure that government as the sole provider and responsible entity for making sure that education is delivered, we work together with them, and we always share solutions like these ones with them so that they can also further improve on the delivery that they are planning. But we also make sure that whatever we do, we don't plan outside the government, but we plan within the policies, not only within, but making sure that we contribute in improving those policies. With those few words, Prof, I would like to thank everyone and wish you a safe drive or safe walk to Kitchenville or Sitting Roomville or Officeville, wherever you are, and those that will be driving from their offices, a safe drive home. Thank you.
Sizakele, you have ended us on a very, very warm note. So thank you so much for that. And from my side, to our wonderful panel members, you've enjoyed so much of conversation, so much to think about. As we say here in Education Conversations, the conversation continues. So we move from the online space into our lounge, into our, whatever else we're going to be doing now. And this conversation just simply continues. It's not goodbye, guys. It's until next time. And we look forward to the conversation continuing. And our next Education Conversation program or webinar will be communicated shortly. So everybody, a very wonderful evening, safe travel, stay safe, and until next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yay, thank you so much. We did it.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you very much.